Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Maureen Gelwicks, and I'm the Operations Director for FIGT. I would like to take a moment to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how you can participate in today's webinar. First of all, if you're having any trouble, difficulty hearing the presentation or hearing me right now, you might try turning your computer volume up as a way to resolve this. And now that you're looking at the computer screen, notice that it has two distinct areas. On the left-hand side is the viewer panel, and then on the right-hand side you have the control panel. And you should also be seeing our three panelists as well on the screen. They are virtually connecting with us via a webcam today. It's through the control panel that you'll be able to participate in the webinar by typing in your questions or by virtually raising your hands. If you look at the tab that has the word questions on it, go ahead and click on the square with the plus sign, and you'll see that it opens up into a split window that allows you to type in and submit your questions. If you would like to ask a question during the presentation, please type your question in the control panel. At the end of the presentation, there will be designated Q&A time where we will address your questions that you type in during the presentation, or you can virtually raise your hand in the control panel and you will be unmuted and announced into the conversation in order to virtually ask your question. To raise your hand, please click the hand icon with the up arrow on the control panel. If you have any technology questions, please type a chat question into the control panel to the organizer. And I would now like to introduce to you and welcome Amanda Bate to the webinar. She will be introducing herself and the panel. Thank you.
All right. Good day, everyone. My name is Amanda. It's actually Bate, but it's okay if you call me Amanda Bate. I am the founder of Bate Consulting, which is a college and career admissions consulting firm that works with young people with figuring out their plans post-secondary school. We have a special interest in global nomads and TCKs because I was one and just love that population. And so I'm really excited to be part of this today because we've got two great other panelists who will be talking about their work as it relates to global nomads. So we have Ellen Mahoney, who's on with us. She is the founder of Sea Change Mentoring, which is an online mentoring organization that works with third culture kids between the ages of 13 and 23 and really helps them with the transitions and maximize and leverage their experiences of having a global upbringing. And Ellen herself is a TCK, so you can imagine the kind of knowledge and awesome wisdom that she has. And we've also got Dr. Jenni Molz on the panel with us today, and she's an associate professor of sociology at the College of Holy Cross in Massachusetts, where she teaches courses on global culture and society and the sociology of travel and tourism, mobility, technology, and global citizenship. So I can only imagine what your what your classes are like with all of that going on. She is currently on a sabbatical where she's doing an ethnographic study on families who road school their children around the world. So with all of that information, we're going to get started with our opening questions, and hopefully as you have questions throughout, as Maureen said, just send them into the questions box and we will try to address them towards the end. So even though I kind of introduced both of you, could you for our audience sort of describe your programs and describe what age group that you focus on and what strategies you employ in your work? Go ahead, Jenni.
Should I start?
Sure.
Okay. Hi, hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Amanda, for the introductions, and Maureen for sort of facilitating all of this behind the scenes. So, as Amanda said, I'm a sociology professor at the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts, and one of the courses I teach that Amanda didn't mention, but is called A Global Sense of Home, and this is geared toward. Originally, I had geared it toward returning study abroad students who were struggling with what does home mean now that I've sort of established a home abroad, and I'm coming back to home at college, and I might have another home as well. But then I opened it up to cross-cultural and third culture kids who are asking to be in the seminar. And through that seminar, I've been able to meet and teach and really get to know some of the wonderful TCK students at Holy Cross. The students, when they come to me, they're seniors, so that is the age group that I'm mostly dealing with. They're in their final year, so they've had their college experience, and now they're starting to think about those big questions of what's next for me, and how do I kind of take my TCK experience and move that forward into a career setting.
Great. Hi, everybody. This is Ellen, and so I run Sea Change Mentoring, which is, as Amanda said, it's an online mentoring program for TCKs. I'm assuming everyone knows what TCK means, but just in case, let me just say that a third culture kid is someone who's spent a significant amount of their developmental years outside of their parents' countries. That said, I think I could speak for all of us that we'll probably use more of a broader understanding of what a third culture kid is. So I would say that, you know, it's someone that is growing up in the international community, and probably they're affected by mobility. So either they moved around a lot from country to country, culture to culture, or they were affected by people that do. For example, maybe you're a local student going to an international school. Probably the thing that all TCKs have in common is this third culture, which is the international intercultural culture. So anyway, we match TCKs between the ages of 13 and 23 with professional adults around the world. And these adults also grew up overseas, so they get it. They understand what it's like to have perhaps, you know, parents of two different cultures or two different religions. They know what it's like to attend an international school, or maybe be the foreign kid at a local school and then moving every few years, these sorts of things. But the sort of the two goals that we focus on are, number one, our mentors help our proteges identify and strengthen the skills and insights that they're picking up from their international background, and then guide them in figuring out how to apply those skills to their future success. And that could be, you know, their personal success, academic success, career success, however they define it. And then the second goal is to, the mentors help the kids identify support systems and coping skills that will help them face some of the challenges that are just particularly unique to this population. The exciting thing is we have an increasing focus on career readiness for our students. So sort of actually thinking about, like Jenny was just talking about, you know, how she works with the seniors, and as they're getting ready and they're thinking about what is my future going to look like, you know, we try and start that conversation early with the kids while they're in high school, while they're in secondary school, so that they can really figure out, again, how to apply this background. They meet online using video conferencing similar to this, and they meet every single week. And there's also a curriculum that we developed that focuses on what we see are the main areas, the main sort of subjects that we think that TCKs should be focusing on. And yeah, they're usually matched for about 2 years, sometimes longer.
And sort of a follow-up question, I'd be interested if Jenny could answer this. With that particular course that you've developed that you just mentioned, what are some of the goals or some of the outcomes that you see maybe that differ from the beginning of the semester towards the end of the semester? So do you see changes or transitions or things that have sort of popped out to you that maybe the students didn't recognize they would go through as a result of taking the course?
That's a great question, Amanda. Well, the course, I guess I should say a little bit about the course. The premise of the course is that in modernity, we're all kind of in this context of global mobility, and because of that, our relationship to home and our relationship to citizenship is really shifting, right? And so what does that mean? As we're living in this mobile world, what does it mean to be at home? What does it mean to be a citizen? And so I have students explore this question both through their own personal experiences, but also through various literature and scholarly articles that study precisely this question. The sociological imagination tries to help us understand the relationship between our personal experiences, our personal troubles, things that we experience as really individual to ourselves, and yet to understand, to see that in a broader context of what's going on, these broader patterns of mobility, these broader patterns of new forms of sociality, right, trying to maintain friendships at a distance and those kinds of things. So I assign a lot of readings that I hope my students can resonate with, novels that kind of express that third culture experience, but also scholarly articles that give them theoretical paradigms and concepts for naming and thinking about the things they're experiencing. So when students first come into the course, some of them are returning directly from study abroad, and so they are having reverse culture shock. And some of them are TCKs who don't even know they're TCKs. Right. And so I assign some reading from some readings, you know, from Pollack's concept of the TCKs, and then they have this this light bulb moment, like, oh, that's me. And so that's kind of, I think, the process I take them through is that sense of shock and disorientation that a lot of them come in with at the beginning of the semester, and then to begin to kind of process that so that by the end of the semester they can see how what they've been through is actually helping them develop certain skills and qualities that they can draw on for their personal success and for their professional success.
Okay. So it's funny because then I think about it draws on what both of you are talking about in terms of career, right? So Ellen just talked about one of the things that Sea Change does is help students think about their careers and how to apply skills. And so sort of in light of what was just mentioned, Ellen, what do you think what do the students that you serve require to be successful in their careers? What are the things?
Yeah, sure. So there's sort of, I'm going to give you like a broad answer and then I'm going to give you real specifics. So broadly, or the thing to think about with TCKs is that first and foremost, people have to be well and sort of know who they are, at least to a degree. So you know, at Sea Change we talk about identity development, for example. We talk about well-being, physical and mental well-being, and those sorts of things. So that there is a strong, and also relationship skills, so that there is a strong foundation from which they can work from. So there's that. As far as career readiness, what we did was, at Sea Change, we looked at a couple of different frameworks that are out there that sort of identify specific skills that experts would say tomorrow's economy requires. And here's the thing about career readiness is that sort of traditionally we used to think about career readiness as, okay, you need to know this particular technical skill. You need to know how to do this very specific thing. And what we know now is with today's world and tomorrow's world is that the economy changes so quickly and technology changes so quickly that in a way, if that was our only approach, it's sort of foolish, because many of the jobs that our young people, like the 16-year-olds that we work with today, when it's time for them to go to university, or after university, there'll be new jobs out there, jobs that never existed when they were still in high school. So then the question is, well, then what skills, how do you prepare young people? So what the Partnership for 21st Century Skills is an organization in the United States. They developed a list of skills that are what we would call soft skills, or what psychologists would call non-cognitive skills. And those are skills such as like critical thinking or communication skills. The idea is that those skills you can adapt to whatever job you have, and you can adapt to the changing world, the changing economy. So specifically at Sea Change, we looked at the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. We looked at a project out of Canada called the New Pedagogies of Deeper Learning, which is done by Michael Fullen. He's the thinker behind that. we looked at the Global Leaders of Tomorrow project, which is sort of a United Nations project, and then some data collected by the International Data Corporation. And we specifically identified 10 skills that we thought make sense for TCKs and that they could draw on and apply for their career. So those are adaptability, which is, of course, a TCK strength. But then, okay, how do you identify it? How do you apply it? How do you market that? Global citizenship, but that means specifically leadership, giving back to the community, responsibility, collaboration. So how do you collaborate with other people to work on projects, teamwork, communication, and at Sea Change that means also communication with our friends, communication with our families, so on a interpersonal level, but also communicating ideas. Innovation, how to solve, that's like solving problems creatively, which again, there is really interesting research for young people that are living overseas that would suggest that they are better problem solvers, more creative actually because of their international background. Identity development, so that's the whole who are you, where do you belong, which is, that's a difficult one for a lot of TCKs. Complexity of thought, which just means sort of taking, how do you look at a problem and come up with solutions from multiple perspectives or multiple fields. A positive outlook, so sort of how do you feel empowered about your work? It's sort of a positive youth development perspective. Critical thinking, and then finally self-care. And that's the whole other piece that's really important to us is, you have to be well in order to be successful and content in your career. How do you do that, and what skills can you develop now that you can take with you through your adulthood?
And I was just going to ask as a follow-up question just on that self-care piece. Is that related under that umbrella of wellness, or is that
yes.
separate? Okay.
It is. Yeah.
And then I'm just curious, could you talk a little bit about sort of the role of wellness in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, unfortunately, the data that's out there in TCKs, it's not great yet. So we can only sort of, at this point, we can only sort of look at what our observations are in the field, sort of our anecdotal information, but our sort of anecdotal experiences would suggest that third culture kids are prone to, or are more prone to than your average person their age to like depression and anxiety, and that's related primarily in this period of transition, so reverse culture shock or just transitioning out of sort of an international community. And in fact, Katja Mace is a researcher in the UK who was also at Families in Global Transition Conference, and she talks about how at 18, this is like a very vulnerable time for TCKs. So we know that there is sort of, we believe that there are these mental health concerns that are out there for some TCKs, and so the exciting thing at Sea Change, the exciting thing for Sea Change is that mentoring there's a lot of research behind youth mentoring first and foremost. One of the most consistent and really promising findings out of the research that comes out of mentoring is that mentoring actually helps decrease depressive symptoms. Mm-hmm. So actually, just having a relationship with a older, wiser adult that knows what it feels like to be in the middle of a bunch of different cultures has a healing effect. But then on top of that, our kids talk about, we have them do all kinds of things depending on what their particular needs are, but either advocating for themselves, so, if they are having issues, figuring out how to understand if they are identifying those issues, and then talking to a counselor, educating that counselor if they have never worked with TCKs before, explaining what it means to be TCK, what some of the issues might be related to that. But on top of that, we also have a very positive approach. So it's not just once you're struggling, what do you do? It's what can you do now to make sure that you remain healthy? If you are in a healthy space, how can you remain healthy? So we talk about everything from exercise to nutrition, to having supportive relationships in your life and how to maintain those.
And the reason I ask is that I'm really encouraged that you guys have that focus as a TCK who's gone through all those transitions, and I know we've talked personally. And the TCKs that I talk to now I started talking to them when they were college students, now they're adults, and they still come back and go, how do I work through this? And I go, okay, this is my experience. It's really encouraging to hear that wellness is becoming a bigger part of that conversation, because it can be hard for parents, especially if you don't have access to the resources, and maybe if you come from a cultural background that doesn't even talk about mental wellness in particular. So that's super encouraging. And that sort of leads me to the next question, which I would like Jenny to actually start first, but Ellen, jump in as you see fit. But do programs that support TCKs or globally mobile young people have a responsibility to help develop them into global citizens?
My short answer is yes. I think we have a responsibility to help develop all young people into global citizens. But with TCKs, we have a really special opportunity to do that and to learn from them. I was really excited and interested to see that one of Ellen's points was this idea of global citizenship in terms of leadership and responsibility. In my course, we talk a lot about global citizenship because the very act of mobility, this moving in between cultures and in between countries, really troubles a sort of stable or straightforward definition of citizenship. And one of the sometimes one of the negative aspects that we might see with mobile subjects is that they seem to be aloof or uncommitted or sort of not really rooted in any one place where they feel like their responsibility lies. And so I think that by helping them develop a sense of global citizenship, we can begin to show them ways that we, all of us, can contribute locally and globally. At the conference, I talked a little bit about how I do this with my students. I try to get them to think about citizenship not in terms of entitlement, right? Not in the sense of like, oh, the world is your oyster and you can have it all and be at home anywhere, but rather to think about global citizenship in terms of course, of the rights, but also the responsibilities and the risks that come with that. And so with that, we think a lot about pairing privilege with responsibility. A lot of my students come from very privileged backgrounds, not all of them, but many of them do. And so I try to fit the course in with the social justice mission of the college in that regard. And so we put a lot of thought into how students can contribute. And part of understanding how they can contribute is understanding themselves, right? Understanding what their skills and talents and gifts are that they have to offer to other people, whether that's right there in a local community or abroad or at a more global scale. And to do that, I do one of the sessions in my course is on discernment. So Holy Cross is a Jesuit college, and there's a Jesuit tradition of discernment. It's a very particular process that you go through. And the idea behind discernment is to basically to figure out what your calling in life is, right? And so I have such a great support network at Holy Cross that, they help me develop materials and things to do this with students. But through that process of discernment, I try to help them understand how they are becoming global citizens, however they contribute to the world. And one of the things that is so lovely, I think, about doing this is that a lot of my students, when they do leave, a lot of them do JVC, which is the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, or they'll apply for different kinds of volunteer projects. And a lot of them apply also for Fulbright grants to teach English abroad. So I'm constantly writing letters of recommendation for JVC, for Fulbright, for Teach for America. And a lot of my students kind of see that as their next step. Maybe it's not a permanent career choice, but it's sort of a next step where they can, in a sense, I guess, give back or sort of test out what they have to give back, what they have to offer to the world in those settings.
I love what Jenny just said, and I love the idea of discernment too. And one of the things that I like about what Jenny's approach is that she's very intentional about talking about global citizenship, and I think that, you know, I see this a lot where people throw that term around very lightly. Oh, just because I lived internationally or my parents are of 2 different nationalities, I'm a global citizen. And I think that global citizenship is something to be developed, it's something to be earned, and like Jenny said, it comes with a sense of responsibility. And so as educators and any sort of community serving professionals, we need to be really intentional about that word and help young people to be intentional about it as well. I also, and I think that as Jenny was talking, it made me think, I had this memory of when I lived in Washington, D.C., and I saw someone a colleague of mine, buy the Washington Post, and then he took out the local section and threw it in the trash before even looking at it, and then went to work on Capitol Hill. And you know, I was a teacher locally at the time, so I couldn't believe that. But he said, well, it's not my community. It doesn't really matter. You know, he was there from another state to do work for another state, and then he was going to go back onto his way. And you know, I think about that when I'm thinking about TCKs. You know, you can always say it's not my community. You know, well, these aren't really my people. I can't really relate. This is not really my government. These are not really my problems. And you know, I think if we have a very narrow focus of like what our people means or what our community means, what does community mean, if we connect it to a geographical location, I think that it could be very easy to sort of almost, you know, to be aloof, to say, well, you know, it's not about me. And I think, so if we think that, look, we belong to a global community, we really do belong to a global community, but therefore, what does that mean? What are my responsibilities then to that community? Then I think you get onto the right path.
And you were talking, and I was wondering, is it that we have not defined really what global citizenship is, in terms of have we made it into a buzzword, or have we a very narrow focus of what we think global citizenship is?
I will say that
sorry,
in my own work. Sorry, Liturgy.
It is. No, it's great.
I will say that, like, doing my work as I defined sort of these 10 subject areas that the curriculum tries to focus on, I looked for a definition of global citizenship, and just I mean, it's all over the place. It's a little some of the definitions that are out there, I have to say, are a little self-important. And again, doesn't reflect sort of the spirit of Jenny's work, for example, of being intentional and thinking about it. So I don't know, Jenny, if you found that people use the same definition, or
yeah, no, I'm laughing because in doing my research, there are just I mean, it's such a huge scope, and that word can take on almost anything, and it can be mobilized to do almost anything. What I'm actually really curious in my current research as well on these road schooling and world schooling families, because one of their intentions is to cultivate a sense of global citizenship in their children. And so what I've been trying to do is operationalize that term as far as they're using it. And it's amazing how closely it aligns with the 10 points that Ellen brought up earlier. The sense of adaptability, the ability to communicate across cultures, the critical thinking and problem solving, but really drawing on, I think what's very special about TCKs, global nomads, and even these world-schooled kids is this ability to hold more than one cultural framework in your mind at once, right? This opens up a whole world of possibilities and habits of thought that children and young adults and adults can bring to problem solving that can be really, really powerful. So no, I can't define global citizenship for you yet, but I'm trying.
And I was just going to say, just for clarification, Jenny, could you just explain real briefly what you're doing with road schooling families, just so our audience can understand?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I've been doing an ethnography. I'm studying families who take their kids out of conventional school settings for a year, some of them indefinitely, and they travel around the world while homeschooling or road schooling their kids. They see the world as the classroom. They see travel as imbued with amazing educational possibilities, and the questions that I'm asking then about these families is how are they using this experience to help their children develop a sense of global citizenship? How are they performing family on the road? We often assume that family is this social unit that's kind of fixed in place, often in a house, right? That's kind of our social stereotype of it. So what does it mean to perform family togetherness while mobile, I think is really, really interesting. And one of the things I'm finding, which I think relates quite closely to what Ellen was talking about earlier in terms of the kinds of skills and careers that people will be moving into, is that these parents are really parenting in an age of uncertainty, right? They really don't know what the future holds for their kids. And it's sort of in the context of that anxiety and uncertainty that they are willing to kind of, forego the conventional structures of schooling and try something different in the hopes of developing a set of skills that might not necessarily fit with the conventional canon, the reading, writing, arithmetic stuff, but that they definitely see as developing a set of sort of emotional skills that they do think their children might need in the future.
Oh, wow. And so, in light of talking a little bit about road schooling families, then here's a perfect question for you. Is having a fluid attachment to the concept of a physical home a positive or negative for globally mobile young people? And how does your work address the concept of home?
Wow, do we have time for this one? I think, well, in my course, actually, this is one of the motivating questions of my course, right? Is having a fluid attachment to home a good thing or a bad thing? And that's kind of a good starting point, I think, for considering the way home is shifting and changing for people. But then we begin to ask ourselves, well, the truth is that it can be good or bad. So the real question is, under what conditions is it good, and under what conditions is it bad? So I have my students think a lot about the conditions of their fluid attachment to home, which often comes from a pretty privileged place, versus the conditions of having a fluid attachment to home for someone who is like materially homeless, right, who is actually homeless. And so they begin to kind of develop, I'd say, more of a continuum on which having a fluid attachment to home can be really fabulous because you kind of you develop this sense of adaptability. You're able to create relationships quite quickly. There's sort of this whole list of ways in which being, mobile is positive, and then there are ways in which it can be negative. And to kind of work through this, I assign various readings, different perspectives, where anthropologists who talk about home, like Mary Douglas is an anthropologist who talks about home, the tyranny of home, and how home is actually a very oppressive place that disciplines labor and actions and relationships. I have them read, I think I mentioned this at the conference, Susan Matt's History of Homesickness. This is a fabulous book. I can't recommend it enough. And she asks, why did homesickness become pathologized? My students really feel like homesickness is a weakness. And Susan Matt shows in her history that it wasn't always that way, that the idea that being homesick is a weakness actually developed in modern society when the multinational corporate powers that be needed a really mobile workforce that could be easily plucked up and put wherever they needed to be. But that historically, that's not the way homesickness was felt. So I kind of have my students work through these different perspectives on home and on having a fluid attachment to home. And then I kind of use it to kind of drill down into these deeper political, social, cultural, and historical questions. And what we usually come to by the end of this interrogation is that it's not really whether having a fluid attachment to home is good or bad. It's more about the conditions of your being at home and the amount of agency and respectability and power that you have over those conditions.
Wow.
I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, I'm always, every time you mention the book, I'm always stuck on it, The History of Home.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
And it's on my docket to read, and it's interesting to hear you talk about that, because I think homesickness is probably a very common marker for a lot of TCKs, and I know it's something I went through, and this is probably the first time I heard you mention it at the conference. It's probably the first time I'd really heard of it in more of a positive sense, instead of, you know, you shouldn't feel homesick, you should be, you know, adaptable, you're going off to college, you're going off to a new adventure or whatever. And to hear it sort of reframed like that, I think that would help a lot of folks. So I don't know, Ellen, I was looking at you going, we need to read that book if we haven't read that book already.
Trust me, I'm glad you reminded me, Jenny, because I'm going to go right off and get it.
Oh, good.
Can I just add something to the sense of home? At Teaching, we talk about home, but sort of similar but different to Jenny, we do try and take a different perspective. Actually, a lot of the work that we do, we try and take a different perspective than sort of the traditional approach with TCKs, in that we are the basic philosophy that is the foundation for our work is positive youth development. And positive youth development is a psychological and educational approach to working with people, with young people. And the idea is that you don't see kids as problems to fix. You see kids as every child has assets and strengths, internal assets and external assets, meaning that their community has assets. And then they also have internal strengths that you can help shape and strengthen, and then they can build upon those. And so when thinking about home, I think whenever I sort of think about things like sort of concepts that we relate to or that we strongly connect to, I think about what is the psychological need that we are filling. So when you think about home, what is home for people? And I don't mean physically, but what is the idea of home? What need does home serve? And I'd venture to say that home serves a need to belong. So, when I'm home, people just get me. They just understand. I don't have to explain myself. I can just be. So a need for belonging, of course, is a major human need. It's also a major topic that comes up for TCKs, where do I belong? And so in that sense, we address home in that we talk about, you know, what does that mean for you to belong? Who do you belong to? Who are you, so that you know who you belong to, et cetera. And so I just want to sort of bring up sort of a youth development approach to the sort of the concept of home, and that and similar to Jenny, just trying to frame it in a way that's positive and not negative. Because again, sort of what's really interesting about what Jenny's saying is that I find, you know, there's a lot of approaches out there for TCKs that sort of, oh my gosh, once you become an adult, it's all going to be miserable. You know, like,
Right.
It's great international background, but once you become an adult, no one's going to understand you. You're going to have major relationship issues. You're going to have major transition issues. The fact is, a lot of that information, a lot of our understanding of TCKs comes from a generation, from a different generation where they didn't have a lot of supports or understanding. This is a new generation coming up, more connected, more global, and with more services, thank goodness, you know. Mm-hmm. And so even the term TCK is just, people know what that term is more and more. And so I get concerned. I don't ever want to talk too much about like homesickness is a bad thing or these sorts of things, because I think it sets up a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So we're not Pollyanna about it. Like I said, we absolutely address mental health issues and just general challenges, but we try and take a positive approach because I know that's effective.
And that leads sort of into the next question about to what degree do modern means of communication sort of affect this big idea of home and global citizenship and global nomadness. And, the further question too is to what degree are close relationships portable and accessible via things like Skype, Facebook, and whatnot. And I guess this is the time I can really talk about TCK chat if you give me a few moments. But so one of the things I always love about technology, and I think this is for most people, is the ability to connect with other like-minded people or even people who think differently than you do. And for us, I think social media has been tremendous. Ellen and I, full disclosure, founded TCK Chat on Twitter as a way to take conversations that we were having as adult third culture kids into more of a global scale. And one of the things I've sort of found in doing it is it's amazing the things that folks want to talk about now. I think we're kind of moving out of that first wave or so of TCK research. And it's interesting to see as we engage with TCKs, for example, on Twitter, what they want to talk about. And so we always talk about the idea of identity. That's a big issue with TCKs. But then now we're starting to drill down the nuances of identity. What is it like for an Arab TCK? What is it like for a black TCK who's coming from the African diaspora and is moving west? What is it like for a Latino TCK in the context of maybe immigration in North America? I know we had a great conversation on race, which still blows my mind, because I had put out an email and said, all right, TCKs, we're going to talk about race. Send me your questions. And we got so many questions that we had to make it into a 3-part series throughout the year, breaking it up: racial identity, racial privilege, racism, and talking about mixed identity. And so for me, I think technology has sort of opened sort of the floodgates to talk about those nuances that maybe, we've talked very macro, but maybe we're starting to get more into the particulars of what the TCK experience looks like. Because I get quite a few emails, I think, from TCKs across the world who say, I really do want to talk about what it's like to be me. A lot of the research talks about me general, but it doesn't talk about me and maybe my own concerns as maybe a TCK from the developing world. And so I'm interested to really hear what you guys think as you see communication and the way we engage, how that really affects these ideas we're talking about.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. So I published a book a couple of years ago called Travel Connections: Tourism, Technology, and Togetherness in a Mobile World. And in that book, I really explored these questions about technology and social relations. How were travelers, I was looking at long-term travelers, how were travelers using technology to connect to people and places while they were on the move? And out of that research and sort of, thinking about the students I meet in my courses and thinking about my current research on world schooling families, I think that the most salient findings for TCKs are that well, technology, like a fluid sense of home, can be good or bad. And there's a lot of anxiety between cultural immersion, right? So when study abroad students go abroad, people get really nervous that they're going to constantly be Facebooking with their friends back on campus or with their families, and they're not going to have the experience they're supposed to be having. And so there's kind of a desire to regulate that. But I actually think that instead of trying to regulate the way students or people use technology, we need to let them learn how to navigate it in ways that support their needs in that moment. And really, because this is something they're going to have to navigate for their whole lives. So on the flip side, I see my study abroad students and TCKs using technology in amazing ways to stay in touch with the people they've met abroad, to kind of establish these really amazing support networks. But what I also find is that technology has its limits. And even with the families that I'm researching now, a lot of them, their kids will get together online, not to communicate, but to do parallel play. So they'll play Minecraft together, or they'll use the technology. But the families also find that what they really need too is to meet up face-to-face. And so they often use the Facebook groups to coordinate these face-to-face meetings so that they can get together in person and look at each other and hug each other and laugh together in certain ways that then kind of fuels another round of mediated communication, right? It kind of gives them what they need to kind of sustain the community online for another however long, and then they get together again. So I think that those would be my two takeaway points, that we need to help young people learn to navigate their use of technology rather than regulating it, and that as wonderful as technology is, those face-to-face meetings can continue to be really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with what Jenny's saying, and I think absolutely I think it's important not to take the approach of regulating like internet use versus helping, instead help kids think about how to use it effectively and helpfully. Again, it goes back to that youth development approach where it's like, what is the need that technology is filling? And if they're filling a need to stay connected, that's positive. So then how do we work with that versus work against it? I think that's really important. I think also what we're seeing now, and I've tried to find more international studies on this, but at least in the United States, and maybe it's international, I don't know yet. But they're saying that Generation Z, which is this generation right now that are between 17 and 18 years old, they are actually more inclined more motivated by in-person time than the millennial generation is and was. And so what you're seeing more is just what Jenny's saying, is using the internet to get off the internet.
Right.
Right. So just using it as a tool, which is what it is, and using it to keep those connections going, but then so that they can have that face-to-face time when they are in that town again, or when they do have their reunions and meetings.
And I honestly think FIGT is a good example of this. I went to the conference for the second time this past year, and there were 6 people that I knew from TCK chat who were there. And we met in person. We now know each other. So, no, I agree with you, and I think that that's just important in terms of what you're saying about using those connections online to sort of connect offline. But I know we had promised that we would allow folks to ask questions, so I want to check in with Maureen real quick to see if there are any questions that are just burning to be answered while we have a little bit of time.
We do not have any questions yet that have come in through the bar.
Okay, cool. In that case, then kind of moving forward and sort of looking at this holistically, to both of you, what are emerging themes in research or practice do you think deserve our attention?
I would say there's a few themes that I notice coming up more. One you actually just brought up, which is, the first word that comes to mind is diversity, but it's more about like digging down deeper. So having less of moving from the broad view of being a third culture kid and going more into individual experiences and variables of being a TCK, whether it's race, religion, which nations you're coming from, which nations you're living in, growing up. So I think those sorts of things. And other parts of identity that your experience might shift, so like your experience of gender as a TCK, your experience of your sexual orientation as a TCK. So those sorts of things I noticed coming up, which I think is really exciting and interesting to take a look at. I think what's interesting is there seems to be a lot of conversations about broadening the term third culture kid, and specifically looking at in the international school space, we see more and more local students attending international schools. What does it mean for them to attend international schools and to be, like I said earlier, affected by mobility? That is can be a confusing part of identity development too. I met a young woman actually at the same conference where I met Jenny at Clark University's TCK conference, and she was talking about how she was a local student in an African country attending an American international school, and when she'd go home, they'd say, "You're too American." When she'd go to school, she's a local, and she never, that was really confusing and difficult for her to develop her identity. And I think there's more and more focus on that, and I'm really interested to look into those sorts of things. On the sort of privilege, race, prejudice, hierarchies, social hierarchies, for the audience out there, I would say looking at Danau Tanu's research, D-A-N-A-U, Tanu, T-A-N-U, she has done a lot of interesting work on international schools in Asia, Asians in international schools in Asia, racism, nationism, those sorts of things, and I think her work is really interesting and sort of at the forefront of those ideas. And the last thing I'll say is that, I've said this like twice already, but I am excited to have a positive youth development theoretical framework to our work, and I do think that's new and innovative for the TCK support world. But you're seeing that sort of concept in multiple places. So, like, I do think TCK chat is a very positive. Like when Amanda and I sat down and talked about how do we want, what's sort of some of like the tenets that we want to like draw from for TCK chat, we said we want to make sure it's constructive. We don't want this to be a place where people just vent and then that's it. I think User Difference magazine, Taya Roxon's media company, his whole tagline is user difference to make a difference. Again, that's really positive, and I think we're seeing more and more of that. I honestly think that probably because we're doing a better job supporting young people as they move through different cultures.
And I just want to, Jenny, before you speak, I just wanted to add on that, and it's right, I was thinking about the work that Tayo is doing. I'm thinking about the work that Donnie Luckett is doing with Cultures Magazine, which is specifically looking at the experiences of those young folks who have grown and have childhoods cross-culturally, regardless of what it is, whether you call them a TCK, you call them a nomad, you call them an immigrant, whatever it is, the work that she's doing, and even the folks over at the Change School, right, Grace and Soul with the online TCK Summit. These are all TCKs with a variety of backgrounds who just sort of looked at what they had in their childhood and looked at their own experiences and said, hey, this can be a conversation with other TCKs. And, they're in all different parts of the world. And so it's interesting to sort of see both the convergence of both the technology, which has made it possible, and sort of the emerging discussions, especially that discussion about TCK and immigrant. That's one that's coming on the horizon.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily a binary, right? I mean, there are a lot of people who identify with both sides of that. I think so. Thinking about areas for future research, I definitely think that we could do a better job at the college level of supporting TCKs. I know some schools do a lot better at this than others do. But my experience at Holy Cross is that this is generally an invisible population, and that we don't recognize them, like in the most literal sense, we don't recognize them. We make assumptions about these students who come in, and we don't necessarily know what their background is, how to support them because of the particular issues they might have because of that background, and also how to integrate them into the community in ways that their background and their skills can really enhance the education that all of the students in the college or university are having. So I think that there's definitely room for research there in order to think more about how we can support and mobilize TCKs at the college level. But beyond just research on supporting them, I think I'm so fascinated by sort of the cognitive effects of having a cross-cultural or third culture background. I know there's a lot of research on bilingualism. Some of it's mixed in terms of what the outcomes are, but I've been reading more and more positive outcomes from bilingualism, and I just think we have so much to learn from the third culture kid experience. I would love to see more research, more sort of theoretical paradigms around that, and more research in terms of applicability. Is there a way that we can maybe somehow take what we learned from the TCK experience and use it to help K-12 classroom teachers and college-level professors enhance their pedagogy, especially when it comes to things like global citizenship?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things I'd be interested in seeing more of.
And
I agree.
I was thinking I agree with you, especially at the higher ed level, because I spend a lot of time in that space. And one of the universities that I'm connected at, we started having this conversation, and part of it was I was triggered by the things you said at the conference and said, hey, we've got a large TCK population at this university. We need to sort of support them. And they ended up actually having an initial meeting, and it was like that light bulb moment where there were half the kids in there go, I didn't realize I was a third culture kid. And then there was a total TCK event happened. Someone mentioned their high school, and someone else went to the sister high school, and they're across the room, and now they're best friends. And so,
that's fantastic.
But what was great about that, I think, wasn't even just for those students, but for the faculty in that room.
Yeah.
Because they started to realize this is an important thing. You know, these kids need support in a way that maybe the university wasn't thinking about. And as I mentioned at FIGT, there are some universities who are doing some great things. I told you there's one that has a TCK organization, and all the advisors are professors who are TCKs. And so I think that the conversation is getting out there, but I think those of us who are in the field and who've also had those experiences probably have a little bit of that responsibility to sort of advocate for that and mention sort of the value for that.
Absolutely.
So,
Amanda, if I can add to that, one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about at Sea Change is sort of this idea of TCKs as a great resource for our communities, and if they are prepared well. But there's a lot of folks are telling companies that they need to start recruitment and talent development while people are in high school as opposed to college and post-college. And because this particular generation, Generation Z, is very career-oriented and career-motivated, more so than other generations, recent generations before them. So, and they are also, Generation Z is looking to get career experience at younger ages. And so consultants are telling companies, look, you need to go into the high school classroom and and talk to them about careers, get internships, set up internship programs for high school students, not just college students. And so if we put that in the TCK context, we know that there are certain skills that young people develop growing up overseas, that we can see through bicultural research, or bilingual research. We can also look at creativity research. Then there's also a lot of anecdotal information that we get that we think, you know what, we do think that TCKs are more adaptable. We do think that they can solve problems from multiple points of view. We do think that they, at least again, if prepared well, can communicate across cultures. So those are skills that the economy requires right now and will certainly require in the future. So why not start working with kids and developing relationships with kids at a younger age when they're looking for it, they're excited about it, they're motivated. I think see them as a resource for future talent.
And on that happy note, which is everything I would say anyway, I would like to definitely thank everyone for listening in. We hope that you got some information that is of value to you. There is a slide with our contact information. If you would like to reach Ellen, Jenny, or I, you can certainly email us or find us on our websites. But thank you once again for joining in, and have a great day.
Before everyone goes, sorry, I just want to say one thing. Sorry, Amanda. That if you are a TCK between the ages of 13 and 23, we are accepting applications until September 30th. We accept applications 3 times in the year, but our next due date is September 30th. So you have some time, but if you're interested, you can go to the website to apply.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Cool. Are we? Don't know.